By the time Daniel Whitmore turned 30, he had more money than time and more influence than trust. Born to a quiet, middle-class family in Manchester, he built Whitmore Technologies from a university dorm into one of the most powerful software companies in Europe. In just 8 years, he'd gone from coding through the night to owning entire floors of Skyline. His was a name whispered in boardrooms and screamed on magazine covers. From his penthouse on the 60th floor, a monument of glass, steel, and silence, Daniel looked down at London as if it owed him something. The view didn't thrill him anymore. Neither did the garage full of hypercars, the yacht moored off the coast of Sardinia, or the jet that waited obediently at Heathrow. And not even Sophia Blake. Publicly, they were the perfect couple. He, the young billionaire. She, the nation's most admired actress. They walked red carpets like royalty. Fashion blogs couldn't get enough of them. But behind the still photos, something moved. A question that wouldn't leave him alone. Did she love him? Or just the orbit he offered? Daniel had built his fortune by noticing small details others missed. Inefficiencies in code, market shifts, behavioral tells. And Sophia had tells. She lit up when gifted a necklace, but blinked away when he talked about failure. She smiled for the cameras, but vanished during his bad days. He remembered a weekend of silence after a major product launch had gone wrong. No texts, no calls, just a brief apology and another gala. Love, he realized, couldn't be measured in affection alone. It had to be tested. The idea came slowly. Then all at once. A fake accident. Complete paralysis. A carefully staged deception to see who stayed and why. It was ridiculous, cruel, intimate, and he was going to do it. He called Henry Collins. The only man from his old life he still trusted. A physician, yes, but more importantly, someone who remembered Daniel before the world did. Henry thought it was a joke, then a mental breakdown. But Daniel's voice held no humor, and his eyes no doubt. "You can't be serious," Henry said. "You'd fake a spinal injury to test your girlfriend?" "No," Daniel said calmly. "I'd fake a spinal injury to see who she really is." It took weeks. Medical files were forged. A scene was staged, twisted metal, blood bags, a call to a private hospital. When the story broke, the press went wild. Tech prints paralyzed in crash. Daniel disappeared for 3 days, then reappeared in a wheelchair, jaw clenched, movements restrained, the picture of dignified tragedy. Sophia was in Paris when Henry called her. There was a pause before she spoke. "I'll come home," she said. Her voice carried concern and calculation. Daniel was waiting at the mansion. The house had been prepared, hospital bed, monitors, pills, and labeled trays. He wore a simple robe. The picture of fragility. Hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, so hard his knuckles whitened. Sophia arrived in a red Dior dress. No time, it seemed, to change after the photo shoot. She looked beautiful, almost painfully so, but not rushed, not messy, as if the emergency had politely waited for her to be camera-ready. "Daniel," she said, her voice catching. "Darling, this is awful." She walked to him, eyes wide, steps calculated. She kissed his cheek like she was being watched. Daniel told her the lie, that the doctors said it might be permanent, that he might never walk again, that he would need care, time, patience. She flinched, just for a second, but he caught it. Then she smiled again. "Of course I'll be here, whatever you need." And yet, by morning, she was gone. Something about a prior commitment, a premiere in Milan. She promised to call, then didn't. Daniel sat in the silence of the house, the wheelchair now less prop and more metaphor. It was the quiet that confirmed what he already feared. Sophia was in love with the surface. And yet, in that silence, something stirred. Emma Hayes had worked in the mansion for years. He'd barely noticed her. 30-something. Brown hair always tied back. Clothes unremarkable. A background figure in a house of spectacle. But now, she was the only figure left. The morning after Sophia left, Emma brought in breakfast. Eggs, toast, espresso. Precise. Familiar. "I remember you liked it this way," she said. He nodded, said nothing, but something in the way she adjusted the cushion behind his back made him pause. It wasn't pity or performance, just quiet attention. She didn't ask questions. She didn't act uncomfortable. She just stayed. And over the next few days, her presence became unavoidable. Not intrusive, just steady. She noticed when he was cold and brought a blanket. When he couldn't sleep, she read aloud, classic novels, mostly, with occasional lines in Welsh that he didn't understand but didn't want to interrupt. And he began to speak, not about the company or the stock price, but about his doubts, his fears, loneliness. She listened like she was storing every word somewhere quiet inside her. And when he asked why she came to London, her answer caught him off guard. Her younger brother, Lucas, had a congenital heart defect. The waiting list in Wales was years long, so she'd taken a job in the city, saved for years, paid for his surgery. Now he was studying medicine. Daniel had met CEOs with stories of grit, but nothing like this. Nothing so quiet, so unglorified. One night, around 3 a.m., he heard movement in the room. Emma was adjusting his blanket. She thought he was asleep. Then, softly, she whispered, "Please get better. I can't bear to see you like this." He didn't move, didn't breathe, just felt the weight of it settle into his chest. That was the moment he knew. Emma cared, not for what he owned, not for what he represented, for him. And suddenly, the lie began to hurt more than the truth ever had. But Emma had seen more than he realized. A twitch in his leg, a toe that moved when it shouldn't, a reflex he failed to mask. She said nothing, until one day, while tidying his office, she found the files. They weren't even hidden well. Drafts of contracts, payment receipts, emails from Henry. It was all there. Emma wasn't shocked. She was quiet. And then she was gone. She left a short letter on the kitchen counter. No accusations, no drama, just a resignation. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, suitcase in hand, she walked out of the mansion, leaving behind nothing but the truth. Upstairs, Daniel sat in darkness. And for the first time in his life, he had everything, except the one person who had truly seen him. Daniel Whitmore had never been abandoned before. Not really. Deals fell through. Partnerships ended. People came and went. But abandonment? That was for other people. People who didn't have private jets and offshore accounts and articles written about them. And yet the silence Emma left behind felt louder than any scandal he'd faced. The kitchen was empty. No clink of dishes. No soft humming in Welsh. Just her letter. Folded. And signed. Professional. Final. Daniel sat in the same chair for hours, holding it. As if maybe the words would change if he stared long enough. He didn't sleep. Couldn't eat. And when morning came, he called the only person who knew the full extent of his stupidity. "Henry." "She's gone," Daniel said, voice raw. "She knows." Henry sighed. Not the sigh of surprise, but of inevitability. "What did you expect? I need to find her." "Daniel," Henry said gently. "You tested her love with a lie. You passed her test. She failed yours. But you failed the bigger one." "I don't care," Daniel snapped. "This isn't about the plan anymore. I love her." Silence. Then Henry said, "Then you're going to have to live like it." The search began within the hour. Daniel activated contacts he usually reserved for mergers and acquisitions. He hired 3 private firms, traced every bank transaction, checked every hotel within 200 miles. Emma had withdrawn all her savings, £55,000, every penny she'd earned in 3 years of quiet loyalty. Then she disappeared, not just from the mansion, from London, from his world. For the first time, Daniel experienced the limits of money. He could buy silence, not forgiveness. He could find locations, not people who didn't want to be found. Days passed. Then Sophia returned. She walked into the mansion as if nothing had changed. Found him standing, no longer pretending. "Darling," she said, "you're walking?" "No thanks to you," he replied, flatly. Sophia blinked. Recalculated. "So, no accident?" "No," he said. "Just a mistake. One I've already corrected." And he ended it. Coldly. Cleanly. No drama. Just absence. It was Emma's absence that lingered. Her toothbrush still sat in the guest room. Her scent still clung to the curtains. Her voice echoed in memory like an unfinished sentence. With every hour she remained gone, Daniel understood the shape of his loss. And so he did the only thing left. He went looking for her brother. Lucas Hayes was studying medicine in Cardiff. Daniel found him in a quiet corner of the university library, surrounded by textbooks and coffee cups. He looked up slowly, recognized the face. "You," he said. No warmth. "I need to talk to you." Lucas closed his book with finality. "About my sister?" "I made a mistake," Daniel began. "I lied to her. I created something artificial to test someone else. But I didn't realize what I'd find." Lucas said nothing. "I love her," Daniel said. Not the housekeeper version. Not the woman who brought me breakfast. Her. All of her. She cried for 3 days, Lucas replied. She couldn't speak for one of them. You took everything she still believed in and used it like bait. Daniel didn't flinch. I know. Then what do you want? For you to tell her this, Daniel said, pulling a letter from his coat. Handwritten. 3 pages. Raw. Lucas didn't reach for it. Words won't fix this. I'm not trying to fix it, Daniel said. I just need her to know the truth. At last, Lucas took the letter, glanced at the first line, then nodded once. I'll give it to her, he said. But you won't hear back. I know, Daniel whispered. He left the campus heavier than he arrived. But there was nothing else to do. Emma would decide what came next. 2 weeks passed. No reply. Then, one gray morning, the doorbell rang. A parcel. No return address. Inside, a small silver cross he thought he'd lost. And a letter, in careful handwriting. If you meant what you wrote, meet me tomorrow. 3 p.m. Hyde Park. Near the old stone bench. Daniel stared at the letter for minutes, memorizing every curve of her script. Hyde Park. 3 o'clock. The place where they'd first crossed paths, 3 years ago, though he hadn't known it then. He was early. The sky was pale, the trees shedding gold leaves in slow spirals. He waited on the bench, the silver cross in his palm, his breath steady but shallow. At precisely 3 o'clock, she appeared. Emma wore a simple beige coat, her hair loose, no makeup, her face thinner, her eyes unchanged. She walked toward him with even steps. No smile. When she stood before him, he rose. They said nothing for several seconds. Then she spoke. 3 years ago, I was here, sitting on this bench, crying before my interview. You passed me during your morning run, handed me a handkerchief, told me, courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Daniel's memory clicked into place. That was you, he whispered. I got the job that day, she said. Because of you. And I told myself I wouldn't forget the man who saw me. Daniel dropped to his knees on the cold ground. Emma, I broke everything. But if you give me a chance, just one, I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. She looked at him, quiet, calculating. I'll give you one, she said. And only one. Lie to me again, and I walk. For good. He nodded, still kneeling. Then I'll never lie again. She offered her hand. He took it, and together, they walked away from the bench, back into something uncertain, but honest. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as Daniel's car rolled slowly down the long driveway. Beside him, Emma sat in silence, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the mansion ahead. She had walked that same path hundreds of times, always as the housekeeper. But today, each turn of the wheels felt different. It no longer felt like returning to someone else's home. The doors opened, and Daniel offered her his hand, not as a billionaire extending courtesy to staff, but as a man who no longer wanted to walk alone. She took it without hesitation. Nothing in the house had changed. The same oil paintings hung above the fireplace. The same grand staircase wound upward in a spiral of polished oak. But for Emma, everything felt different. The space had shifted. Or maybe she had. They stood in the kitchen for a long moment. It was the room where she'd once made coffee quietly in the background. Now, Daniel stood beside her, uncertain, watching her expression like a man fearing the verdict. That evening, they sat in the drawing room. No champagne, no grand statements. Just the low crackle of firewood and a silence that felt heavier than any boardroom. Daniel spoke first. I spent years behind walls I didn't know I'd built, he said quietly. I thought control was strength, that if I could predict everything, I'd never be hurt. Emma didn't interrupt. She just listened, the way she always had. I wanted to test love, he continued, but what I did was manipulate it. I made a lie so convincing even I started to live in it. And then I came along, Emma said softly. The wrong person for the script. Daniel met her eyes. No, the only person who saw through it. She studied him for a long moment. I don't need apologies. I need consistency. No more performances. You'll get the truth, he said. Every day. She didn't reply, but she reached out and took his hand. And for Daniel, that was enough. The days that followed weren't cinematic. There were no slow-motion reunions or sweeping music, just small acts of repair. They shared meals, simple ones, walked through the winter garden, talked late into the night, at first cautiously, then freely. Daniel began to change, not with declarations, but through repetition. He no longer spoke in sound bites. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He began noticing the things Emma cared about: her love of old maps, her habit of folding napkins into triangles, the way she lingered when holding a book she didn't want to finish. For Emma, trust was still a process. She watched him closely, not with suspicion, but with guarded hope. She saw how he moved through the house differently now, less like a king, more like someone grateful just to be invited in. One morning, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the Thames, he turned to her. "If I never walked again," he asked, "would you still have come back?" She didn't hesitate. "I never left because of your legs, Daniel. I left because of the lie. And if I ever needed help again, I'd be here," she said. "But not as a nurse, as your equal." That night, Daniel lay awake longer than usual, watching the ceiling in the quiet. For years he had chased admiration, loyalty, praise. But now, what kept him grounded was something far rarer: being known. It was a quiet Thursday when he made the decision. There would be no media announcement, no designer spectacle, no flashbulbs, just the truth, again. He waited until Emma returned from her evening walk. She opened the back door to find the winter garden transformed. Dozens of lanterns glowed softly along the garden path. Candles flickered on a small table set for two. And at the center, Daniel stood awkwardly in a sweater dusted with flour. "I cooked," he said. "It's edible." "Barely." Emma stared at the scene, stunned. "What is this?" He walked toward her slowly. "It's not a performance," he said. "There's no story to sell. Just one thing I want to ask." He knelt on the cold stone path, pulled a small box from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Emma froze. No diamonds. No speeches. Just a question. She blinked back sudden tears. "Yes," she whispered. "But only if you keep burning the toast." He laughed, and she kissed him. The wedding came a year later. No press. No influencers. Just family and those who had stayed when things fell apart. Lucas stood beside Emma, proud and protective. Henry Collins was there too, watching the ceremony quietly. And Daniel, for once, looked like a man not trying to impress anyone, just grateful to be allowed in. Emma wore a simple ivory dress. Daniel wore the same silver cross she had returned to him months earlier. They married in the same garden where he'd once knelt in a lie, now redeemed by truth. Afterward, they danced beneath the trees. No DJ, just a small string quartet. The laughter was real, the smiles unforced. And when the last guests had left, Daniel stood beside Emma, watching the candles flicker out. "I spent most of my life thinking success was about getting everything you want," he said. "And now I think it's about being forgiven and not wasting it." Emma said nothing, just leaned against him. And in the quiet, they stayed. A year later, their daughter was born. They named her Grace. Not because it was fashionable, but because that's what she was. When Daniel held her for the first time, something broke open inside him. Not the polished executive or the strategic mind, but the man who had once lost everything and now, by some miracle, held a second chance in his arms. "I thought Whitmore Technologies was my legacy," he whispered to Emma. "But it's this. It's you. It's her." Emma smiled, exhausted but radiant. "We had to lose the illusion," she said, "to find the real thing." And Daniel, for once, had nothing clever to add. The mansion hadn't changed. Same high ceilings, same polished stone floors, same quiet echo in the halls. But Daniel moved through it differently now. Not like an owner. More like a man trying to inhabit a space he once dominated. Emma had returned to it on her own terms. No longer as staff, not as someone beneath him. He didn't make grand declarations or apologies. He gave her space. And with time, she began to fill it again, not as housekeeper, but as someone whose presence redefined the place. They lived quietly, purposefully, without ceremony. Daniel took his company off autopilot. He appointed a CEO, stepped back from daily control, and stayed home more. Not to retreat, but to rebuild. They started sharing mornings. Long walks. Conversations over breakfast that used to be handed to him without a word. For a while, nothing big happened. And that was the miracle. Emma began to speak about her own dreams, things she'd kept buried, languages she once studied, books she wanted to write. Daniel listened without trying to solve anything. Just listened. It was new for both of them. Their daughter arrived the following winter. They named her Grace. Not because it was poetic, but because it was the only word that made sense. Daniel held her for the first time with hands that had once signed billion-dollar contracts. Now they shook as he cradled something fragile and new. He didn't say anything poetic in the hospital room, just whispered, "Thank you," over and over. To Emma, to Grace, to no one in particular. They didn't hire a nanny, didn't outsource bedtime. Daniel changed diapers badly, held bottles awkwardly, panicked during fevers, and loved every second. He kept a photo on his desk of Grace sleeping on Emma's chest. No one else saw it. It wasn't for anyone else. Weekends were theirs. Walks in the garden. Dinners that didn't follow any schedule. He stopped checking stock prices during breakfast. Emma teased him the first time he burned toast. He laughed, then did it again the next weekend, on purpose. 3 years passed. Quietly, deliberately. Whitmore Technologies kept growing, but Daniel rarely made headlines anymore. People assumed he was bored, or lost his edge. They didn't understand. He was finally awake. He took Grace to the park every Sunday. Hyde Park, the same bench where he'd once knelt and begged Emma for one chance. Grace liked to climb it now, pretending it was a pirate ship. One Sunday morning, as they sat under a gray sky, Emma turned to him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The accident?" She nodded. "The lie, the test, all of it." He was quiet for a long time, then said, "Only the parts that hurt you, and the rest." "I needed to lose everything," he said, "to see what actually mattered." Emma didn't reply, but she took his hand and held it for the rest of the walk. That evening, he asked her to the garden. It was cold, early spring. The lanterns along the path flickered under a light wind. He led her to the same spot where he'd proposed the first time. There was no speech, just a small wooden box. Emma opened it. Inside, a key. "A house?" she asked. "Not a mansion," he said. "Just a place. No staff. No gates. Somewhere we make mistakes without anyone watching." She looked at him for a long moment. "You want to be ordinary now?" "I want to be real," he said. "Whatever that looks like." She smiled. "Let's try." The cottage was small, off a narrow road, quiet, without cameras or security systems. Daniel learned how to fix things himself, badly. Emma kept a list of what not to let him touch again. They fought over groceries, over radio stations, over the correct way to stack mugs. And every time they did, Daniel caught himself smiling. It meant something was working. Grace learned how to pick strawberries. Emma planted herbs. Daniel mowed the lawn terribly and refused to hire anyone to fix it. The neighbors never suspected who they were. No one cared. That was the point. On the third visit to the cottage, Daniel burned dinner. Again, Emma laughed as the smoke alarm blared. "You could have just ordered in." "I could," he said. "But then I'd be the man I used to be." She kissed his cheek. "You're not." The idea came one night over tea. Emma mentioned a report about displaced single mothers trying to re-enter the workforce. Daniel had just finished reviewing scholarship applications for a minor university program he'd funded anonymously. "There's so much waste," Emma said. "Of talent. Of people." Daniel stirred his tea. "I built something from nothing. But I had every advantage. And now I want to be the advantage." That night, they drafted a plan. No PR. No photo ops. Just action. A foundation. Not in his name. Not in hers. In honor of what brought them together. Truth after deception, healing after ruin. They called it the Hayes Initiative. The first phase launched quietly. Technical training for single mothers, housing assistance for displaced women, therapy funding for trauma survivors. Daniel showed up at sessions himself. Not as founder, just a man who listened. He told his story once, to a room full of women who had every reason not to believe in change. He said nothing about billions, about companies, about yachts. He just said, "I once pretended to be broken, until I actually was." One woman asked, "And how did you get better?" He looked at her, then smiled. Someone stayed when she didn't have to. Emma watched from the back of the room, and Daniel, mid-sentence, caught her eye and forgot what he was saying. She nodded once. He didn't need to finish. The Hayes Initiative grew faster than they expected. What started as a small training program in East London expanded into multiple cities. Community centers were converted into classrooms. Laptops replaced old chalkboards. Women who once sold bottled water on street corners now presented UX projects to investors. But it wasn't the numbers Daniel cared about. It was the eyes, those who walked into the building with their shoulders hunched, heads down, silent, and walked out with a job offer, or a plan, or simply the belief that they hadn't missed their one chance. Daniel showed up often, sat at the back of coding sessions, spoke quietly with students between breaks. Not once did he mention Whitmore Technologies. Most of them didn't recognize him anyway. He liked it that way. Emma oversaw the personal development side, mental health, communication, boundaries, things she had learned the hard way. She never gave long speeches, but she sat with women for hours in quiet rooms, listening in a way that made people say things they hadn't said aloud in years. And Grace, now nearly 7, ran around the halls like she owned them. She didn't understand the full scope yet, but she understood one thing. This place helped people. That was enough. One afternoon, after a board meeting, Daniel and Emma sat in their office overlooking the city. Emma had her feet on the couch, a cup of cold tea beside her. Daniel was quiet, reading a handwritten letter from one of the graduates. A woman who had escaped a violent marriage, learned to code, and was now employed full-time in Birmingham. Emma watched him. "You still think about what you almost ruined?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded. "Every day." "But you didn't." "I did. You just forgave it." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you forgive yourself?" "Some days." Emma stood, walked over, sat beside him. "We don't owe the world anything," she said. "But we do owe Grace the truth. She deserves to know who her parents were, and who they became." Daniel folded the letter, placed it in a box with dozens of others like it. "She will," he said, "when she's ready." Years passed. Grace grew, learned 3 languages, asked impossible questions, carried her mother's quiet strength and her father's piercing observation. Emma published a book. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was honest. A collection of essays about invisible labor, emotional intelligence, and the anatomy of trust. People who read it didn't recommend it casually. They recommended it urgently. Daniel declined offers to return to the public spotlight, turned down documentaries, said no to brand deals. When pressed, he only replied, "That version of me served its time." Instead, he taught, quietly, unadvertised, once a week at a community college near Hackney. He never wore a suit. Students knew him as Mr. Whitmore, a man who asked hard questions and expected answers that didn't come from Google. He gave one lecture titled "The Cost of a Lie." No slides, no notes, just 1 hour of unfiltered memory. Half the class cried. The other half stayed after to talk. He never repeated the lecture. Grace was 10 when she first asked, "Did you always love Mom?" Daniel smiled. "Not at first. I didn't know how." She looked confused. "How can someone not know how to love?" "Because love isn't natural to everyone," he said. "Sometimes you have to unlearn everything else first." She thought about that. "So what made you learn?" "Your mom stayed when she could have walked away." Grace nodded. "Then I won't walk away either. Not from people who matter." Daniel felt something in his chest shift. "You're already better than me," he said. She grinned. "I know." On their 15th anniversary, Emma and Daniel stood on the same garden path where he'd once knelt and asked for a second chance. Now the house was quieter. Grace had gone to university. The world had changed again. Faster, louder, but their corner of it stayed simple. Emma took his hand. "You ever think about how it all started?" "More than I should," he said. "You?" "Sometimes." "Any regrets?" She looked at him. "Only that I didn't stop you sooner." He laughed. "Do you think people like us ever stop trying to fix ourselves?" he asked. Emma thought. "No, but maybe we get better at forgiving what we find." Daniel nodded. "You think Grace will be okay out there?" "She's more prepared than we ever were." They stood in silence. The lanterns in the garden flickered like they always had. But this time, neither of them felt the need to say anything profound. A few years later, the Hayes Initiative received a government grant for expansion into rural communities. They opened a campus in Wales, in the town where Emma grew up. It was named not after her or Daniel, but after Lucas, her brother, now a pediatric heart surgeon. Daniel gave the opening speech. He didn't read from notes. "My daughter is 21 now," he began. "She doesn't know what it's like to wonder where her next meal will come from, or to feel invisible in a room full of people. That's not because of me. It's because of people like you, who show up, who build." He paused. "I was a man who once tested love by faking pain, and I lost someone because of it. But she came back, not for the show, not for the name, for the man I hadn't become yet. And that," he said, "was the beginning of everything." In their old age, Daniel and Emma spent most of their time at the cottage. The mansion still stood, but it had become a place for gatherings, events, guests. Their real life happened somewhere smaller. Grace visited often. She brought books, stories, sometimes a partner she wasn't ready to introduce properly. They never pressured her. They just made tea and listened. One morning, Daniel sat alone on the back porch. A notebook open, pen idle. Emma joined him. He didn't speak at first, just looked out at the trees, then said, "I used to think legacy was about buildings, names carved into things. And now? Now I think it's about the people who keep showing up long after you stop needing to be right." Emma rested her head on his shoulder. "No one remembers the old lie," she said. "I do," he replied. "So I don't repeat it." She smiled. "Then maybe that's enough." The sun rose slowly. And Daniel, once a man who faked tragedy to test love, now lived a life quiet enough that he could hear every honest thing said to him. And he never stopped listening.